realizes that most of us have an ambivalent, and I would even say conflicted relationship to power. Like part of us wants it, part of us is afraid of it. And I think what we're afraid of is that if we really step into our power, like if we really be all of who we are, that other people couldn't hack it, and that we might end up rejected and alone. And so what we're risking by not stepping into our authentic power is really like soul devouring mediocrity. And we settle for crumbs of pseudo love. Like if we don't heal our relationship with power, we're gonna end up blowing each other up. And ironically and sadly and tragically, in the name of God. What really has the potential to make us happy, to fulfill us, is when we step into our unique purpose. Whatever you throw my way, I got this. So that's being in your power. It's like knowing who you are and knowing you can handle whatever curveballs life is going to throw your way.
So welcome everyone to the Evolving Man podcast. I'm the founder of The Awakened Man and your host, Alan DeMonso. Have you ever said yes when inside you really wanted to say no? That's just one example of many ways that we tend to sell our power in order for us to avoid conflict or looking for acceptance. And yet this is an all too common occurrence in today's society, isn't it? And being able to transform our relationship to power is how we stop cheating ourselves and selling out. So today we're going to dive deep into how we can authentically express ourselves through the different types of power that we actually have. But before we get into all that, I do want you to go out and hit like, share, and the buttons that you find on your favorite platform, and do hit subscribe for the podcast in order to keep up to our latest information. And in the meantime, if you're really interested in raising your standards as a father, a husband, and an entrepreneur, then I encourage you to participate in the Hero's Quest. It's a 90-day mentoring program guaranteed to transform all areas of your life. So where can all of this be found? We can find it at the Awakened Man Training Academy at members, that's plural, members.theawakenedman.net. And with that, let's get on with today's episode.
Today's man knows who he is, where he stands, and what he aspires to become. Solid in his convictions, owner of his destiny, ever evolving into husbands and fathers our wives and children expect and deserve. We are the masters of our life and the leaders of our homes and community. Welcome to the movement. Stay strong, my brother.
So before we get started, let me ask you a couple of questions. When you think of the word power, what comes to mind? Is it strength, courage, emotion? How would you describe your relationship with power? Are you afraid of it, overuse it, or are you not really sure exactly what I'm talking about? Well, no matter how you responded to that, my guest today is going to shed some light on this thing that we call power. So allow me to introduce my guest. With 30 years of experience, Christian De La Huerta is a sought-after spiritual teacher, personal transformation coach, and a leading voice in the breathwork community. He has traveled the world offering inspiring and transformational retreats, combining psychological and spiritual teachings with lasting and life-changing effects. He's an award-winning, critically acclaimed author and has spoken at numerous universities, conferences, and on the TEDx stage. His new book, Awakening the Soul of Power, was described by multiple Grammy Award winner Gloria Estefan as the balm for the soul of anyone searching for truth and answers to life's difficult questions. Thanks for joining me today, Christian. How are things?
Hey, Alan, thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to a conversation with you. I like what you're up to. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I have to say, I was so inspired by looking at your work, and I was really excited about us getting a chance to talk today, because I think it's something that's missing for a lot of men, is understanding our power and how we can harness that. And so tell us a little bit about your journey and what led you to do spiritual transformation work, and why you feel that maybe you're the unlikely person to be talking about heroism specifically.
Yeah. I say that I am unlikely to be speaking about empowerment or heroism because I was so painfully shy as a teenager. I was okay one-on-one, Alan, but if you introduced the third human, I shut down. To the degree that I was a good student. I was a 4.0 student, except for one B in high school. And I didn't set out to do this, but looking back on it, I know that I sabotaged my GPA with that 1B, because back then there was no way, there was absolutely no possible way that I could have gotten up in front of an auditorium filled with hundreds and hundreds of people to deliver the valedictorian speech. There's just no way. So, it's kind of sad, kind of tragic, but the good news is flashing forward. I've spoken all over the world, like you were saying. I've spoken at so many universities and colleges on the TEDx stage, so that I know that I can walk somebody by the hand to overcome these fears and all the stuff that we have allowed to hold us back from really stepping into our power. Because I know that if it can happen in me, it can happen in anybody.
100%, my friend. So tell me a little bit more about this power work. And then that's what your TEDx talk was, wasn't it? On power, on authentic power?
The TEDx is a little bit old. The TEDx talk, I think, is probably, I don't know, close to 10 years now, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite that old, but it's on the power of the breath. So it relates more to the breath work as a healing modality, which is incredibly powerful. But I've been thinking about this issue around power for probably 10 years. And it took the pandemic to sit my butt down and actually get it out of my head and onto the screen, and then eventually onto paper. And what I've been thinking about, because I've been doing retreats on that subject for years, and what I've realized is that most of us have an ambivalent, and I would even say conflicted, relationship to power. Like, part of us wants it, part of us is afraid of it. And I think what we're afraid of is that if we really step into our power, like if we really be all of who we are, that other people couldn't hack it, and that we might end up rejected and alone. And who wants that? We also fear that we might abuse it. And no wonder, like, how many abuses of power have we witnessed in our lifetime? All you got to do is turn on the news any given day or read the morning headlines online to witness at least one abuse of power. And who wants to do that? And on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, that power is a negative. So with quotes like "power corrupts," absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what good-hearted person wants to be corrupted? But what they didn't tell us about that quote is that Lord Acton was speaking specifically about political power, not the personal power that you and I are talking about. So we've gotten confused about this whole issues in relationship to power. And then add to that mix, the fact that we've been conditioned, especially as men, to make the emotions to a sign of weakness. Like, I don't know who came up with that idea, that little boys don't cry. Like, how many of us heard that growing up? Like, little boys don't cry, and you gotta stiffen up and be a man, and sort of this, implying that to feel means weakness. It's like, wait a minute, what a faulty misunderstanding. Like, the emotions aren't strength, they're not weakness, they're not good, they're not bad, they're just energy. What used to be spiritual teaching that everything is energy, now we know from quantum physics that it's true. So that means that this chair that I'm sitting on, your microphone, the body, the emotions, it's all energy, even though it might feel solid. And energy cannot be destroyed. So all those times that we have stuffed our emotions, and like you were saying, all the times that we have said yes when inside we were seething and it was a no, that stuff doesn't go away. It doesn't dissipate. It gets lodged in our bodies and leads to a lot of problems, including physical problems. It starts showing up as health issues after years and decades of suppressing ourselves and swallowing our emotions. And we can talk about the effects of that. And, as men, because I think men pay a higher price for that. But to complete the thought, when you add all that into a mix, what happens is that we end up giving away our power, our inherent, innate power that nobody can give to us. Nobody can take away. We are the only ones who give it away. And the sad part is that we give it away for the lamest of reasons. Like, we say yes when inside we feel no, when, for an illusion of acceptance, we stuff ourselves into smaller little packages because we don't want to rock the boat too much, for a false sense of acceptance, for an illusion of security, and we settle for crumbs of pseudo love. And so the what the book is about is like saying, it's like, wait a minute, there's a way that we can reclaim our power, that we can step into our power in a way that doesn't have to be about force, abuse, corruption, that doesn't have to be related to fear, that doesn't require that we push anybody down, step on them in order for us to feel powerful. And that's what I walk the reader through.
Yeah, that is such a great intro into your book and your work, Christian. And what I really liked about your analogy on the power is about how it has been driven home, I think, for many men and in society in general, about the toxic side of masculinity. And some of the work that I'm doing with men work is helping us understand the archetypes behind it's working in the shadows for us, right? And what you're describing is really that child portion of who we are as men. And it's learning how to grow and be men and be centered in our masculinity. And I want to get into that in a little bit, but I want to get a little bit more into why you wrote the book and how it's impacted your life and the lives of your readers.
Well, several things, I think, looking back on it, triggered my thinking about this. One of them, I have to say, was my older sister. I'm one of a large Catholic, I come from a large Catholic family. I'm one of 9 kids, the second oldest. We have an older sister who, growing up, she was just like a natural born leader. And there's only 12 years between the youngest and the oldest. So she would like boss around not only the 9 of us, but the entire neighborhood, like 15, 20 kids, and not in a bossy, nasty way. It was just a natural thing. She said, oh, let's go do that. And we would all say, okay, let's all go do that. When she hit puberty, I don't know what happened. I don't know if somebody said something to her that women didn't behave that way, or whether she just picked it up, through osmosis from society, but she turned it off. She just turned that off and then assumed this kind of Mother Teresa persona. And I always thought that was kind of tragic. Mm-hmm. So the book is for everybody, but I have a particular message for women, coming from my belief that the empowerment of women is the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world. And not to put women up on a pedestal, not to idealize women. Women also abuse power, not even close to the rate that men do it in, but it's because as a world, as a species, we have been running so off balance between the masculine and the feminine energies. And like you were talking about in this expression of toxic masculinity, which I don't even think it's authentic masculinity, qualities that to me are neutral are negatively associated with the feminine. And we have placed the feminine as something lesser, as something weak, where if we really come to think of it as like, wait a minute, even that is a faulty assumption. You want to talk courage and resilience. Let's talk about the power that it takes to create birth and to give birth. It's like, shit, I don't know if you've seen the video, but there's a video on YouTube they came up with this system. I don't know what it is. It was some kind of magnetic or electrical thing. And they'll put it on a guy so that it can mimic the process of what it feels like to go through contractions. And the guys is like, can't even handle like one, and that's it. And so it's funny. And it also makes me think of Betty White, who just passed, the comedian. And apparently the story goes that she was being interviewed in one of those interviews where they have like 2 or 3 celebrities, and somebody said something about having balls. And she goes, wait a minute, how did we get this connection about strength and balls? You thump those little thing and the guy collapses over, bends over in pain. If you want to talk power and strength, let's talk vaginas. Those things take a pounding.
Of course, Betty, right?
Yeah, she was unique. But anyways, it's of course, this is not about putting men down. It's about finding the balance and finding ways of expressing our masculinity that are a match for who we are, because this toxic system that you were pointing to, this patriarchal system with a distorted view of what it means to be a man, of course, has oppressed women and caused incredible suffering for women over the last several thousand years, but men have also paid a price for that. So, let's look at suicide rates in the US, where I'm based. Men commit suicide 4 times as frequently as women. In fact, 70% of all suicides are committed by middle-aged white men, which are pretty clearly, as far as I'm concerned, the group that still holds the majority of the power in this world. So there's something like, what's up with that? It's like, if you're holding all the power, why are you committing suicide? Something doesn't add up. And if we look at longevity, like women outlive men by 5 years in the US, by 7 years globally. What's up with that? I think that part of it is at least because of this, what we're talking about, what we've been trained to believe, that we got to walk around like these uncaring, unfeeling robots, these zombies. And there's a price to pay for that, because what we were talking about, because those emotions don't just dissipate, right? What happens is we stuff them, and then we stuff them some more, and then the next unfortunate one just rubs us the wrong way, and we explode disproportionately, and we cause harm to our relationships. Or we suppress. That stuff, that energy has to come out one way or the other, and it starts seeping out and showing up as bodily symptoms: heart attacks, cancer, ulcers. So we got to get this. We got to heal our relationship to our emotions and our relationship to power.
That is so powerful, Christian. And I completely agree. And I took a couple of notes there. I really liked your discussion there on empowering women. And I think that's where a lot of us as men and in society, that we get this idea that it's either or, right? It's either masculine or it's feminine. And it's not, and that's not really who we are. Men or women men and women have both traits of masculinity and femininity. It has nothing to do with being, I'm more feminine or more masculine. It's about, how do I utilize the strengths within each of the traits to become the best person that I can be. And I think so. I wanted to mention that. I thought that was so great that you mentioned that, because it has been this dystopia, ever since really, it really kicked off with the women's movement, and then, which was a very positive thing, but it really painted men in general in the wrong light, and we took it the wrong way.
That's right.
We allowed it to go that way, not really understanding ourselves, so we didn't know how to combat and how to really step into that space.
No, you're speaking so much wisdom there, and yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's about energies, and the whole universe has balance between the masculine and the feminine. Much to the surprise of some humans, we're part of the universe, so we're also governed by those same energies, by those same principles that rule the stars. So of course, we have masculine and feminine energies. And we've gotten into trouble because we try to ignore and repress and suppress, and we've made the feminine wrong. And we're all paying the price for that. We're all paying the price for that. And again, it's not to idealize women, but when women are in 50% of power, because I don't think it's the right thing to go back to a matriarchal system. No, what we need is balance. And so, but when women are in 50% of power, we're going to have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and how we treat the environment, to all of it. And so that's the reason that inspired that belief in me, because it's strategic thinking. Like, all right, what is one thing that we could impact that will then impact all those other incredibly challenging issues that we have to deal with? And that's what I land on. It's empowerment of women. When we do that, we're gonna heal all those other stuff, or find that balance again in the world.
Completely agree. And I think about about how the challenges that we're faced with in today's world and today's society, that we need to look outside of our normal places to find the answers, right? The answers always reside higher than the level of the problem. And so we need to raise ourselves up. And when we stay stuck in the old mindset of what masculinity is and what it means to be a man, I think that's when we get ourselves into trouble. And so let's talk a little bit about what soulful power means to you. You use that term lots in your writing, and want to get a better understanding of what you mean by soulful power.
Yeah, soulful power, spiritual power, authentic power. I use them all interchangeably. So I think one of the reasons that we have this conflicted relationship with power is because there are different types. And we think about only one way. So we tend to think about, what I call worldly power or egoic power. which is the way that most of us tend to relate to and understand power. So who do we normally think has power, right? We associate it with people who have money, who are famous, who are, high up in some kind of hierarchy, whether it's the corporate ladder or some religious institution or something. But the thing about all those kinds of power, that they're external, right? They're outside of us. Because of that, they're fickle. Here today, gone tomorrow. That kind of power, that worldly power, is also always has an agenda. It's always trying to grab something for itself. So it's self-serving, and it's always blowing itself up to seem bigger than it is. We don't have to think very far back in history to think of political leaders who have all the money and all the power that you could have, and they're miserable. They're thin-skinned. One tweet sends them into a whole tailspin of reactivity, and you can just see what poor levels of self-esteem they have. And so that we know, those externals have our satisfaction, our sense of personal empowerment, our purpose, which I know that you work a lot with too, has nothing to do with any of those externals. And so, in contrast, the other kind of power, which I call spiritual power or soulful power, it's inside each and every one of us. Like, nobody can give it to us. Like I said, nobody can take it away. We are the only ones who give it away, who sell out on it, for those reasons that we were talking about before. And it's humble. It has nothing to prove to anybody. Like, it just is. So I think of a Gandhi or Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, in their simple monastic robes, their sandal feet. You would never know how much power they hold until it's needed. Then get out of the way, right? Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point in terms of global reach, without ever shooting a single gun or landing a single punch. That's power.
100%. Wow.
Yeah.
That's excellent. So good. So good. So let's talk a little bit more about the trappings of power. You mentioned a few, right? The fame, the money, the status. So how do we keep ourselves from abusing that and getting seduced by that? Because it's so easy, isn't it? Just to be, if I have a little bit of fame, we tend to strive for a little bit of status. So how do we avoid falling into that pit?
Yeah. And it's seductive. And I have, part of, in the book, I try to make, because it is kind of intense stuff to be writing about, I try to make it fun and use the hero's journey, which I know that you also work with, which is what I knew we would have a really great connection and conversation. So I created maps about, the different paths of power and all the traps and the danger zones and the pitfall of victimization and this and that, judgment, reactivity, all the things that are the realm of the ego. So if we want to step into our authentic power, there's no way around it. It all comes back to self-esteem and self-acceptance. The first step, what is necessary before we can have those, is self-awareness, because we can't do anything about what we can't see, about what we're not aware of. So that's why I say self-awareness is the very first step, like understanding why we do the things we do. Why do certain people trigger us? When the same behavior triggers me and you don't give a crap about. So why is that? Why does it get my goat like that? Right. And it's work for sure. And that's why I say that it's a heroic journey, because it takes the willingness and the courage to look inside of ourselves and to face our inner demons and our crap, the stuff that is needing healing. But it's incredibly worthwhile, because otherwise what happens is we're governed, we're ruled by these unconscious, unhealed parts of us. And until we look at it and until we face it, it's going to continue getting in the way of our lives and our relationships. So yes, it's courageous, but the rewards are infinite, because the rewards are a life that works, relationships that have a chance at working, a sense of personal empowerment, and a life that is filled with meaning and purpose, and freedom. It's because otherwise we're being like people who just figure out that we have a button for for XYZ, for being late, says that, let's go with that assumption that I have a button that when somebody shows up late, it really bugs me. Whereas, say you, it's like, okay, wow, 20 minutes, they're showing up 20 minutes late, great. I get to go and let me go return that phone call. Well, I'm going to go into that shop, or I'm going to just go glance through the headlines, or read that email. It's like, wait, so many possible responses to somebody being late. Why does it get me so much, get me so pissed off? So if we're willing to do that work, then we can free ourselves from that. Because if we don't, we're always going to be at the effect, in the power of anybody who shows up late, whether consciously or unconsciously. Because all they got to do is figure out that that's our button. Then all they got to do is show up 20 minutes late, and they got us.
Yeah, no kidding, right? There's a gentleman that participates in some of our Band of Brothers group mentoring program, and he made a comment in one of the meetings. A guy was getting triggered, and he said, "My father always told me that I didn't put the button there, on you. You have that button. I just know how to push it." And it's so true, right? Like we have these buttons, and it does seem to come from the people that know us the best. Seem to be able to push those buttons. And really, what I take from what you're talking about is really, do we have the courage to do that shadow work, to get away, to really integrate that and distill what is going on with us, and getting deep into that work. And for a lot of guys, that can be scary, right? I think it's that part of that hero's journey where they really struggle. We really struggle as men to unlock some of these things that are going on, because we don't realize how it's hurting our progress in life.
Yeah, but that's a really good point, because if we're going to be redefining and upgrading, right, our version of masculinity, so that it's because our version of that version of toxic masculinity it doesn't work. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work for anybody. So if we're going to be updating it, that's part of what I did in a chapter in the book that talks about what does it mean to be a man in the 21st century? And so some of the very same qualities that we have always identified with, like the conqueror, the explorer, there aren't, in terms of being the explorer, there aren't that many more lands on this planet that we can conquer or explore. There just aren't there. There's the only frontier left is really like outer space. And maybe the really, really deep oceans. But what about if we conquered our own fears, like what you're talking about? If we conquered our own limitations, if we had the courage to explore that shadow, that subconscious, to figure out why we do the things we do, and why we get stuck in certain patterns of behavior, and why we keep attracting and recreating certain types of relationships, and why we get triggered by certain situations or certain people. It takes work. There's no way around it, but it's heroic work. So if that's one of the ways, or some of the ways that we can devote and express our traditional male roles, the roles that are traditionally associated with being a man, and conquer our own weaknesses, our own limitations, wow, talk about a heroic opportunity.
No kidding. And I think that's so powerful of what you're talking about, is that really what I'm getting from what you're saying is that there isn't one idea of what masculinity looks like. It's up for us as individual men to come up and define that for ourselves, because it will be slightly different as each of us, because we bring different things to the table. And so I think that is so important. And instead of trying to be like somebody else, or be like something that society says that I should be, what are we comfortable in? Are we okay with being in our own skin? And that's really the work. And so one of the things, go right ahead. Sorry about that.
No. I love what you're saying. I love how you're framing that. And the other, another one that I think is important to look at is the provider role, because I think that's one of the ones that so many men are struggling with, because we have traditionally identified as the one who brought the bacon home. And I don't know about the numbers in Canada, but in the US, I think it's in the book. The numbers are in the book, but I think it's from 17, 18. At that point, already 38% of heterosexual households in the US the women were earning more than their men. And in the US, more than half of college graduates are women. Mm-hmm. So we see which way this is going. And then what happens is that men who are subtly, and my heart goes out to them, especially from the older generations whose identity was only that, and then they're losing their jobs. But instead of like realizing that their jobs are being replaced by computers or by robotics, or they're being outsourced and taken off, to a different country, they turn that anger and blame, the immigrants, or they blame somebody else. So they displace that anger. And so what I'm saying is like, wait a minute, like, are you really going to define who you are as a man by the size of your paycheck, or anything else by that matter? For that matter, really, that's what you think makes a man? Because to me, that's a really pitiful way of defining one's manhood. And if you want to like redefine or expand the way that we think about that provider role, there are so many more ways in which we can provide. Like, what about becoming the rock, the foundation, like the real foundation in your household for your family, so that to create a safe space for your family, your spouse, to evolve, to grow, to become the most that they can be? That is priceless. That is so much more an incredible contribution than any kind of paycheck that you could contribute. And so that, providing that sense of stability, and also a safe emotional space. I mean, that's part of being that rock, so that our kids, our family can rest and grow and evolve from that. Feeling like, hey, we got their back.
And Christian, you've just blown my mind with that discussion on expanding what providing and presiding really means for men, because we do tend to be tunnel vision, thinking that it's about bringing home the bacon, and we forget that presiding and residing as a true, going back to Moore's work with thinking about the king archetype, yes. The true king sits there on the throne and takes care of the kingdom. It isn't just about bringing in taxes. It's about being, knowing when to be, not thinking the right word here, but, to be supportive, how to be supportive, how to create space to allow our family to grow and expand, because it's so much more than money. And like you said, the statistics are showing, right, that many relationships are in that position where men are not necessarily the predominant money driver in the relationship, but there's so much more that, without offending any of my female listeners, that a female just can't bring to the table. Just like a man can't bring some of the female traits necessarily to the table. We have our piece of who we are, and it's about allowing ourselves to expand more than just this narrow idea that, well, it means that I need to work all the time, and I need to bring home the bacon, and not understanding that, well, you know what, maybe my partner can make more money, and how else can I be a partner in this relationship and grow it and be that, like you said, like that rock. I think that's so key.
And like you teach, because I was reading on your website, and I love that that you're working with this kind of stuff and helping guys break through that. Because I know from, in my spiritual community, which is the yoga community, the, kind of the alternative, more holistic, spiritual, but not religious community. What's happened, what some of my women friends tell me, is that because men don't want to be associated with that toxic expression of masculinity, but that in some ways, in some cases, they start like not becoming feminized, but becoming. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not about giving up our strength and our courage and our power, not at all. In fact, we're talking about a journey of empowerment. So it's not about sacrificing those things. It's just about letting go of the aspects of the toxic expression of masculinity that don't serve us, that we have outgrown as a species, that just don't help anybody, including men.
Completely agree. And what I'm thinking of is there's there's two sides of, or two areas on the spectrum for masculinity, right? There's the aggressive side, which I would tend to say is more of a toxic version. But how do we learn to become more assertive? Because being assertive allows space for that other person to still be there and be present, and not have us come across as a hammer. So not everything becomes a nail. We become, we're still assertive because we're sharing our beliefs. We're raising the level of our intimacy, being vulnerable enough. And I know when I use that word in some of my men's work, guys kind of get the cringe feel, but let's call it what it is. Like, you just need to be vulnerable, deal with your shit or whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. But it's about being able to have that conversation and what you really feel is important for you with others, family, your spouse, your partners, that they still have space to allow themselves to express authentically as well. So,
beautiful. Yeah, some really juicy stuff that you just brought up there. So in reverse order, the vulnerability part. Yeah, we've gotten confused, and we've labeled vulnerability weakness. Yeah. Right. And then we've this toxic expression of what it means to be a man. We think we've got to walk around like this, not feeling, just anticipating, waiting for the next shoe to drop, anticipating the next attack, sometimes sneaking in the first punch preemptively just in case. This is not power. This is a freaking prison. Yeah. Like, we're walking around like this. No wonder we're having heart attacks and stomach ulcers. We're like DEFCON 1 24/7. What a way to live. Mm. That's a prison. Whereas really, if we think about it, this, like, opening up in relationship to life, and in that sense, you could say that it's a more vulnerable relationship to life. It's actually more empowered, because this stance towards life is pretty much saying, hey, life, whatever you throw my way, I got this. So that's being in your power. It's like knowing who you are and knowing you can handle whatever curveballs life is going to throw your way. That's a position of incredible power. And then the other thing that you were talking about, which is really interesting, which was that, goes back to the two different types of power. Worldly power believes that power is zero sum, or in other words, that there's a limited amount of it, so that your having power takes away from mine. It's like, wait a minute, it's another faulty assumption. Why would your power take away from mine? If I know who I am, if I'm in my power, like, I can handle whatever comes my way. I am not threatened at all by your having power. In fact, I can celebrate you also being in your power. So it's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, 100%, because we move from a mindset of lack and a fixed mindset to a mindset that says that I have growth and there's opportunity, because truly the universe is abundant. And when we get to understand that it is, then we can step into that power and do things that are more in line with who we are authentically. And I think that's the work that, I know that you do. That's the work that I do, is to help men to discover what their power is. I never really thought of it that way, but that's really what it is. I always say it's about helping men lead a life of purpose, on purpose, meaning that we're not just daydreaming our days every day, walking through and it's just rote. It's, are we taking purposeful action?
Yeah. And I love it. I heard you say that. I listened to one of your interviews. Well, I just wanted to get a sense of who you are and what you do on your podcast, and heard you say that. I was like, I love that, because you're absolutely right. Like, to me, like, I think anybody listening to this, that will be interested and has stuck with this conversation this long, knows that no amount of money, no amount of worldly success, no amount of travel, no amount of sex, no amount of anything like that outside of us is going to make us happy. There's just not enough of it. And so, as far as I'm concerned, and that no relationship is going to make us happy, right? And that it's not even their job to make us happy. If that's how we're approaching a relationship, you are going to make me happy? Whoa, hang it up. Because ain't nobody out there that's going to make you happy. So only we can do that. And so, as far as I'm concerned, what really has the potential to make us happy, to fulfill us, is when we step into our unique purpose. Mm-hmm. So I love that you emphasize that so much, and discovering what we're here for, and what is it that just turns us on, that gives us forgive me if anybody's offended by this, although I don't think so. That gives us that spiritual hard on. You know, like what really, like that when you're doing that, then time stops.
Yeah. Love it. Just love it. Just love it. Now, listen, we talked a little bit about the cost, right? We already know that the suicide rate for men is so high. And that I know that's one of the costs. But what are some other costs through your work that is having us, that we're taking on by selling out on our power?
Oh my God, it's miserable. I mean, we've all done it. You know, like to use the example that you and I were using before, like every time we say yes, when inside it's a no. Every time we're overriding our desires, our preferences, our dreams to maintain an illusion of security or to not rock the boat too much, that doesn't sit well with us. That feels yucky, right? And after multiple times and years and decades of doing that, that is soul devouring, right? And so what we're risking by not stepping into our authentic power is really like soul devouring mediocrity. And on the individual level, you know, lives that are just lacking of meaning and purpose, and relationships that are just not going to work. That you know, they might be comfortable, but they're not fulfilling. And on a global level, if we don't figure this out, you know, like if we don't heal our relationship to power, we're going to end up blowing each other up, and ironically and sadly and tragically, in the name of God.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And we'll cross our fingers that we don't get there, and send some proactive prayers out to change that mindset. And I think that's happening already as the world becomes more awake, not woke, but awake.
Yeah. Well, we seem to be in really interesting times. I mean, we're like at a juncture point, a choice point. Like, which way are we going to go? Are we going to go back to that old patriarchal way? Because understandably, you know, because of what we're talking about, it's not working, and the balance of power is shifting between the genders. But you know, it's like the white, you know, the control of the world by white people is going to be it's going to be balanced. It has to be balanced. So that it's a more fair system, a more equitable system. But if we're holding on to the way that it used to be, and we want to go back to the 50s, is like, forget it, right? So there are some number of people that are going back, and they're going back to the more autocratic, dictatorial systems of government, and we're witnessing it today in front of our eyes. Yeah. And then with Putin invading Ukraine, so there's that. U.S. went through a little scare of that, and so are we going to do that, or are we going to, like, at the same time, you know, we're also waking up, like you're saying, and we're realizing that there's just a different way of doing this.
Well, for anything new to come, there has to be some destruction, right? And that's, you know, and that's really not that I'm much of I wouldn't consider myself to be a Bible scholar for sure, but that's really the second part of the story of the apocalypse. Really, it's about the growth of something new to come, and in order for that to happen, something has to be destroyed or break down, right? Once we eat our food, we compost it, we use that to grow more food, is the kind of the mindset that I'm getting at with that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. There are systems that are just no longer sustainable, right? Like, and especially the way that we treat the environment, our relationship to the environment, if you know, which stems back to this patriarchal, unhealthy expression of masculinity. Because, can I use a 4-letter word here?
Sure.
Okay, good. Because that stems from a fuck it or kill it relationship to life, relationship to the world, right? You're either going to fuck it or I'm going to kill it. And it also stems from the externalization of the sacred, right? Like, how much further could we have placed the sacred? Anything that was considered sacred, we put way outside and away from us. And where the hell is heaven anyway? And so anything that was of the physical reality, we made it something to be conquered, subjugated, controlled. And then so no wonder we treat the earth the way that we do, just like rape and pillage and extract and take advantage of it, and without regard to even to our survival. It's insanity. It really is insanity. And then in the case of the body, we animalized it. In the case of sexuality, we demonized it. So no wonder we have sexual stuff as a species. No wonder.
Yeah, so true, so true, so true. Man, we could go on forever. So I want to talk a little bit about some practices though. So you got some practices that you have in the book. So what do you recommend for us, that some practices that we can take on to help us in our journey to be more self-empowered and live more authentically?
Yeah, and every chapter, by the way, I designed a book in a very interactive way and very manageable way, because I know how busy and overscheduled everybody is. So short chapters with practices at the end of each. And they're the kind of practices that, I mean, and it's not intense stuff. It's just like maybe sometimes questions to trigger self-awareness, so that we begin to make the unconscious conscious and understand why we do the things we do. So some of the practices, and they're designed to integrate the teachings, so that the teachings don't stay at the level of information. We don't need more information. We've got information overload at our fingertips. There's no way we could even read through all the stuff that's written about all this stuff. So what we need is transformation. And that only comes from applying, from integrating the teachings. And that's what those practices are designed to do. So for example, one of them might be, like I said, anything that's going to increase our self-awareness and get us aware of why we do the things we do. So as we go through life, start paying attention. In which situations, for example, do I tend to give my power away? Right? Is it with authority figures like parental figures, religious leaders, bosses, coaches, that kind of thing? Or is it in intimate, romantic, sexual relationships? Is it in situations where my survival feels threatened? Right? So, and there's no right answer. It's just about becoming aware, in our case, what that is. And so that's the type of practice that I would recommend. Another really practical one is to use the breath. And we don't have time to really go into what's happening in the brain and in the body when we slow down the breath. But it's very powerful and very effective. So that when we find ourselves, that we're about to lose it, we're about to react and then regret. Right? We're about to react and say or do something that we're then later going to regret after the adrenaline dissipates. Take a breath. Right? That's the best way to just press pause before we react. And by taking a breath means taking several slow, deep breaths. Right? There are swamis in India that have that much control over the body that they can tell the heart to slow down, and it does. Now they can even mimic states that are almost impossible to distinguish from death, right? So you can't tell if they're dead or alive. Most of us aren't there yet and probably not going to have that much control over our bodies. But any one of us can slow down the breath. When we slow down the breath, the heart has no choice. The heart has to slow down. And as the heart slows down, then the body begins to relax. Right? Think about when we get upset, we're tightening, or we're breathing faster, our heart starts beating faster. What we're trying to do is reverse that consciously. Right? So, and it all begins by slowing down the breath. We slow down the breath, the heart begins to slow down, the body begins to quiet down, the nervous system begins to relax, and then we can make a choice about what we're going to say or do, rather than come from that instinctive, reactive place of really fear and defensiveness, which doesn't work. It only gets us into trouble.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Well, I want to thank you so much, Christian, for spending time with us today. And we unpacked so much. And I know we could have done, another 2 hours just talking about living on our authentic power and reclaiming ourselves as men. And so I'm just wondering, how do people get a hold of you? How can they reach out? Do you have a program that you recommend for them as well?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks so much for asking that. Probably the best way to reach me. The book is available wherever books are sold. You can get it on Amazon, or if you want to support your local bookstore, you can order it. It just might take a few more days to order it that way. In terms of reaching me, probably the best way is my website, which is soulfulpower.com. From there, they can access my social media. And for anybody who gets on my email list, and we all know how quick, how easy it is to click unsubscribe if it doesn't work for you. But for anybody who gets on my email list, we'll send them a sample chapter for the book. And it's one that talks about what it means to live heroically in the 21st century, which I think will be very supportive to your audience, because obviously that's you dive into that, you delve deeply into that stuff and those beautiful archetypes that you work with. And then we'll send them also a guided meditation on trust. How do we step into trust? And I created it last year in the middle of the pandemic, I guess the year before, whenever it was, to help us find that place, that eye of the storm place, where we can keep our own center while all this drama and all this insanity is rotating around us, including other people's expectations and judgments and all that stuff. We can always maintain our center and our equanimity. And so the meditation is like, how do we move into that place of trust? And in terms of a program, I've been doing retreats, like live retreats, for over 30 years. Of course, I haven't been able to do that since the pandemic, especially because I use breathwork as a healing modality. And obviously we can't breathe together powerfully in one room yet. And so I've pivoted, like so many other people had to do, and I'm offering virtual programming, and I'm offering a year-long coaching program, which is amazing. Like the retreats are amazing, and I'll go back to them as soon as I feel it's safe to do that I can provide a safe space for people to do that. What I'm loving about the year-long is that by stretching out the teachings, I get to deliver bite-size, so just a little bit each week, with the practices that we were talking about, which helps us to apply them and integrate them into our lives, which makes it more sustainable. Right? It makes the transformation more sustainable. Because what I realized over the years is that in some number of people that would come to a weekend and have this amazing expansion, and if they didn't have a support system and the practices and the kind of support that you're providing in your men's groups, it's easy to forget, and it's easy to get sucked back into the day-to-day and the distractions of life. And then the old voices of fear and self-doubt and the self-sabotaging and defeating behavior start creeping up again. And then they'd have to go and do another retreat. This ensures that, just a little bit at a time, but sustainably. And accountability, right? Coaching calls with me every 2 weeks, keeping us doing what we said we were going to do.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So I'll make sure to put all that information in the show notes so people will be able to get access to your work, Christian. I'm so grateful again for having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thanks so much. I knew that you and I would not run out of stuff to talk about, and so many points of overlap and synchronicity that I knew we would have a great conversation. And thanks for having the show. I know that in your willingness to do so, many lives are being touched and impacted. So thank you for that.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Evolving Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.